The void that separates the pulp of the material nerve from consciousness is broader than the solar universe, for even when the most distant known star, we can imagine the ever-ending flight of a ray of light that has once started on its travel into space. Can any man outline the bridge that connects the intellect with nerve or brain, mind, or with any form of matter? The fact that the surface of the bodies of some animals is capable of performing the same functions for these animals that the eye of man performs for him is not more mysterious than is the function of that eye itself. The term darkness is an expression used to denote the fact that to the brain which governs the eye of man, what man calls the absence of light is unrecognizable. If men were more magnanimous and less egotistical, they would open their minds to the fact that some animals really possess certain senses that are better developed than they are in man. The teachers of men too often tell the little they know and neglect the great unseen. The cat tribe, some night birds, and many reptiles can see better in darkness than in daylight. Let man compare with the nerve expanse of his own eye that of the highly developed eye of any such creature, and he will understand that the difference is one of brain or intellect and not altogether one of optical vision surface. When men are able to explain how light can affect the nerves of their own eyes and produce such an effect on distant brain tissues as to bring to the sense objects that he is not touching, he may be able to explain how the energy in darkness can affect the nerve of the eye in the owl and impress vision on the brain of that creature. Should not man's inferior sense of light lead him to question if, instead of deficient visual power, there may be a deficiency of the brain capacity of man? Instead of accepting that the eye of man is incapable of receiving the impression of night energy and making no endeavor to improve himself in the direction of his imperfection, man should reflect whether or not his brain may, by proper cultivation or artificial stimulus, be yet developed so as to receive yet deeper nerve impressions, thereby changing darkness into daylight. Until man can explain the modus operandi of the senses he now possesses, he cannot consistently question the existence of a different sight power in other beings and unquestion existing conditions which lead him to hope for a yet higher development in himself. This dissertation is interesting, very, I said. Although inclined toward agnosticism, my ideas of a possible future in consciousness that lies before mankind are broadened. I therefore accept your reasoning, perhaps because I cannot refute it, neither do I wish to do so. And now I ask you, cannot you explain to me how darkness, as deep as that of midnight, has been revivified as to bring this great cavern to my view? That may be made plain at a future time, he answered. Let us proceed with our journey. We passed through a dry, well-ventilated apartment. Stalactite formation still existed, indicative of former periods of water drippings, but as we journeyed onward I saw no evidence of present percolations, and the developing and erosive agencies that had worked in ages past must long ago have been suspended. The floor was of solid stone, entirely free from loose earth and fallen rock fragments. It was smooth upon the surface, but generally disposed in gentle undulations. The peculiar soft radiant light to which my guide referred as vitalized darkness or revivified sunshine pervaded all the space about me, but I could not by its agency distinguish the sides of the vast cavern. The brightness was of a species that, while it brought into distinctness objects that were near at hand, lost its unfolding power or vigor a short distance beyond. I would compare the effect to that of a bright sunlight shining through a dense fog, were it not that the medium about us was transparent, not milky. The light shrunk into nothingness. It passed from existence behind and about me as if it were annihilated without wasting away in the opalescent appearance once familiar as that of a spreading fog. Moreover, it seemed to detail such objects as were within the compass of a certain area close about me, but to lose in intensity beyond. The buttons of my coat appeared as distinct as they ever did when I stood in the sunlight, and fully one half larger than I formerly knew them to be. The corrugations on the palms of my hands stood out in bold serpentine relief that I observed clearly when I held my hands near my eye. My fingers appeared clumsy, and all parts of my person were magnified in proportion. The region at the limits of my range of perception reminded me of nothingness, but not of darkness. A circle of obliteration defined the border of the luminous belt which advanced as we proceeded, and closed in behind us. This line, or rather zone of demarcation, that separated the seen from the unseen appeared to be about 200 feet away, but it must have been more or less, as I had no method of measuring distances. Along the chamber which we now passed I saw by the mellow light great pillars, capped with umbrella-like covers, some of them reminding me of the common toadstool of upper earth on a magnificent scale. Instead, however, of the gray or somber shades to which I had been accustomed, these objects were of various hues and combined the brilliancy of the primary prismatic colors with the purity of clean snow. Now they would stand solitary like gigantic sentinels, again they would be arranged in rows, the alignment as true as if established by the hair of a transit, forming columnar avenues, and in other situations they were wedged together so as to produce masses, acres in extent, in which the stems became hexagonal by compression. The columnar stems, larger than my body, were often spiral. Again they were marked with diamond-shaped figures or other rectangular geometrical forms in relief, beautifully exact, drawn as by a master's hand in rich and delicately blended colors on pillars of pure alabaster. Not a few of the stems showed deep crimson, blue, or green, together with other rich colors combined, over which, as delicate as the rarest of lace, would be thrown, in white and enamel-like intricate tracery, far surpassing in beauty of execution the most exquisite needlework I had ever seen. There could be no doubt that I was in a forest of colossal fungi, the species of which are more numerous than those of upper earth cryptomatic vegetation. The expanded heads of these great lathogens were as varied as the stems I have described, and more so. Far above our path they spread like beautiful umbrellas, decorated as if by masters from whom the great painters of upper earth might humbly learn the art of mixing colors. Their under surfaces were of many different designs, and were of as many shapes as, if it is conceivable, could be made of substances of the circle and hyperbola. Stately and picturesque, silent and immovable as the Sphinx, they studied the great cavern, singly or in groups, reminding me of a grown child's wild imagination of fairyland. I stopped beside a group that was unusual conspicuity, and gazed in admiration on the huge and yet graceful, beautiful spectacle. I placed my hand on the stem of one plant, and found it soft and impressible, but instead of being moist, cold, and clammy, as the repulsive toadstool of upper earth, I discovered to my surprise that it was pleasantly warm and soft as velvet. "Smell your hand," said my guide. I did so, and breathed in an aroma like that of fresh strawberries. My guide observed I had learned to judge of his emotions by his facial expressions. My surprised countenance was indifference. "Try the next one," he said. This being of a different species, when rubbed by hand, exhaled the odor of the pineapple. "Extraordinary," I mused. "Not at all. Should productions of surface earth have a monopoly of nature's methods, all the flavors, all the perfumes? You may with equal consistency express astonishment at the odors of the fruits of upper earth, if you do so at the fragrances of these vegetables, for they are also created of odorless elements. But toadstools are foul structures of low organism. They are neither animals nor true vegetables, but occupy a station below that of plants proper," I said. "You are acquainted with this order of vegetation under the most unfavorable conditions. Out of their native elements these plants degenerate and become then abnormal, often evolving into the poisonous earth fungi known to your woods and fields. Here they grow to perfection. This is their chosen habitat. They absorb from a pure atmosphere the combined foods of plants and animals, and during their existence meet no scorching sunrise. They flourish in a region of perfect tranquility, and without a tremor, without experiencing the change of a fraction of a degree in temperature, exist for ages. Many of these specimens are probably thousands of years old and still growing. Why should they ever die? They have never been disturbed by a breath of moving air, and balanced exactly on their succulent pedestal-like stems, surrounded by an atmosphere of dead nitrogen, vapor, and other gases, with their roots embedded in carbonates and minerals that have food at command, nutrition inexhaustible. Still, I do not see why they grow to such mammoth proportions. Plants adapt themselves to surrounding conditions," he remarked. "The oak tree in its proper latitude is tall and stately. Trace it towards the Arctic Circle and it becomes knotted gnarled and rheumatic, and dwindles to a shrub. The castor plant in the tropics is 20 or 30 feet in height, and in the temperate zone it is an herbaceous plant. Farther north it has no existence. Indian corn in Kentucky is luxuriant, tall, and graceful, and each stalk is supplied with roots to the second and third joint, while in the Northland it scarcely reaches to the shoulder of a man, and, in order to escape the early northern frost, arrives at maturity before the most southern variety begins to tassel. The common Jimson weed, Datura stramonium, planted in early spring in rich soils, grows luxuriantly, covers a broad expanse, and bears an abundance of fruit. Planted in midsummer, it blossoms when but a few inches in height, and between two terminal leaves hastens to produce a single capsule on the apex of the short stem, in order to ripen its seed before the frost appears. These and other familiar examples might be cited concerning the differences some species of vegetation of your former lands undergo under climatic conditions less marked than between those that govern the growth of fungi here and on surface earth. Such specimens of fungi as grow in your former home have escaped from these underground regions and are as much out of place as are the tropical plants transplanted to the edge of eternal snow. Indeed, more so, for on earth the ordinary fungus, as a rule, germinates after sunset and often dies when the sun rises, while here they may grow in peace eternally. These meandering caverns comprise thousands of miles of surface covered by these growths, which shall yet fulfill a grand purpose in the economy of nature, for they are destined to feed trampling multitudes when the day appears in which the nations of men will desert the surface of the earth and pass as a single people through these caverns on their way to the immaculate existence to be found in the inner sphere. I cannot disprove your statement, I again repeat it, neither do I accept it. However, it still seems to me unnatural to find such delicious flavors and delicate odors connected with objects associated in memory with things insipid or so disagreeable as toadstools and the rank forest fungi which I abhorred on earth. The bridge that connects the intellect with nerve or brain, mind, or with any form of matter. The fact that the surface of the bodies of some animals is capable of performing the same functions for these animals that the eye of man performs for him is not more mysterious than is the function of that eye itself. The term darkness is an expression used intellect and not altogether one of optical vision's surface. When men are able to explain how light can affect the nerves of their own eyes and produce such an effect on distant brain tissues as to bring to the sense objects that he is not touching, he may be able to explain how the energy in darkness can affect the nerve of the eye. In the actions of men too often tell the little they know and neglect the great unseen. The cat tribe, some night birds, and many reptiles can see better in darkness than in daylight. Let man compare with the nerve expanse of his own eye that of the highly developed eye of any such creature, and he will understand that the difference is one of brain or intellect. The void that separates the pulp of the material nerve from consciousness is broader than the solar universe, for even when the most distant known star, we can imagine the ever-ending flight of a ray of light that has once started on its travel into space. Can any man outline to denote the fact that to the brain which governs the eye of man, what man calls the absence of light is unrecognizable? If men were more magnanimous and less egotistical, they would open their minds to the fact that some animals really possess certain senses that are better developed than they are in man. The